Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. After a couple episode detours to celebrate my 100th podcast, we're back to pick up where we left off on the main story. And on this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 295 through 297, which will be covering manga chapters 410 through 414. And it is Nami's time to shine as she shows off her incredible mastered skills of the Clima-Tact against Kalifa. Okay, so synopsis. Nami and Kalifa continue to duke it out as she figures out Kalifa's Awa Awa Devil fruit. Nami begins to show off her new mastery of her Clima-Tact so they can set Zoro and Sogeking free, who are still at the mercy of Kaku and Jabra, unable to fight back effectively. All the while, they need to figure out how to deal with the rampaging Monster Point Chopper, who is still on the loose, wreaking havoc to friend and foe alike. Alrighty, so differences. There really aren't too many differences. The first one being, in the anime, there's sort of an insert scene with Sogeking as Hana Arashi and Zoro fighting just after Chopper reveals himself to Kalifa in the Nami fight. This scene doesn't really exist in the manga. It just kind of proceeds on with the fight, so there's really no interruption with the Kalifa versus Nami fight. There's also a couple extra added scenes of Luffy fighting Lucci after Nami finishes off Kalifa. Again, these aren't really in the manga. Most of these are just to add padding so that the episodes run a little bit longer without using new content. And then there's a couple more scenes of Usopp bluffing Kaku and Jabra. These are also filler. In the manga, after Nami starts to rip the clothes off of Kalifa, it immediately cuts to Chopper already chasing Sogeking and Zoro. So there's none of this extra talking with Usopp, Kaku, and Jabra. But that's really about it. It's mostly just about padding out some extra time. So yeah, we'll jump right into my thoughts on these episodes. So the episode begins where we find Spandam and Robin after he had just battered her down the stairs, which is pretty brutal to say the least, because she falls down I didn't really count, but it looked like she fell down 10 steps at least. The two things that stood out to me in this scene is Spandam's insane amount of hubris, not realizing the gravity of what he's just done, and the fact that he won't recall the Buster Call for the sake of not looking stupid. The other thing I really liked about this moment is how all-in Robin is at this point. She not only desperately wants Luffy and the others to save her, but she believes they will, even in the face of the impending Buster Call. I mean, that really shows just how Robin has come from the beginning of this arc. And it's really nice to see, even though this scene is kind of hard to watch, it is really great to see how invested and how she's basically committed to being part of the Straw Hats now. Next, we finally get to see more of the Lucci versus Luffy fight, even if it's only for a brief scene. And first off, I love the music they choose here. The intense strings here sets up this beginning stage of the fight really well. Luffy is definitely holding his own far better against Lucci this time around, even in his base form, but Lucci still seems to have the upper hand as he's landing more hits on Luffy far easier than Luffy is landing on him. I'm sure one thing that's on a lot of people's minds when they watch the early part of the fight is why neither of them go full strength and end the fight sooner, especially Lucci with his leopard form. For Luffy, it's clear he doesn't want to use his gears because they both have severe drawbacks, as Gear 2 drains his stamina really quickly, and Gear 3 has that weird chibi shrinking thing afterwards. But why doesn't Lucci use his leopard form to end the fight quickly? This is not really explicitly explained, but to me, at least it's always been the case of Lucci wanting to play with his food. He's got some extreme bloodlust, as we've already seen, so him wanting to enjoy the fight is probably why he doesn't go full on here. Also, his job is to basically buy time for Spandam to get Robin to the gates of justice. After a short scene with Kokoro finding Chimney and Gombe, we return to the current main event, Nami versus Kalifa, where Nami is immediately caught up in the same attack that Sanji was done in with some very suggestive and fan-servicey imagery. Why was it necessary that the first two things the camera had to zoom in on were Nami's boobs and ass being rubbed? It's just so much. It's just way too much. And you know what? This is still tame compared to the fan service that's in the series at this current time. in like episodes like what 10 or 1000 plus. But as a fun side note, the name of the move Golden Bubbles in Japanese is kind of a wordplay. So Golden Bubbles in Japanese is Golden Awa, or an awa meaning bubbles, but it also sounds a lot like Golden Hour, which is a term for that hour where the sunset is just at the right time. I don't think it has any connection to the sunset, but in Japanese it's essentially a double meaning. This double meaning will go on to actually be used in her other attacks, namely the relax bubbles she uses later, which doubles as relax hour or relax awa. So yeah, there's a lot of wordplay going on, as you'll see with some of the other CP9 agents we'll see when we fight Jabra and Kaku. In any case, Nami is in trouble now as her mobility is severely hindered from being all slippery, but worse is that she has a hard time gripping her Clima-Tact now. Nami is able to get a hold of the Clima-Tact and is able to avoid Kalifa's Rankyaku with a Mirage Tempo to give her some time to think, but suddenly Monster Chopper comes bursting through the floor and the wall, but Kalifa is comically confused as to how Nami's Mirage Tempo works, and so she mistakenly thinks that Nami has somehow Mirage Tempoed herself into this beast, with Nami just standing right behind Kalifa wondering, how stupid is this person? And Nami immediately recognizes that it's Chopper based on the antlers and the hat, which brings up a random thought in my head as the reader or viewer about that hat. And this is actually something that's never really crossed my mind up until this particular rewatch, is what the hell is that hat made of that allows it to stretch and shrink so easily? I mean, it's kind of like the Hulk's pants, how it just keeps stretching and shrinking as he needs it, whether he goes into Bruce Banner or the Hulk. Anyways, Chopper, still unable to control himself, attacks Nami, and it's here Kalifa finally realizes that they're two separate entities. But I love that she's so embarrassed she needs to go out of her way to state that she wasn't fooled into thinking that Chopper was Nami. But Nami at this point is way more concerned about Chopper's well-being and ignores Kalifa completely, which further embarrasses her. And she says her trademark, "How insolent," or "buremono," and then I was getting a chuckle out of that one. Chopper in his mindless rampage rips the bathtub and throws it out below, potentially landing on Sanji. We then see Chopper continue on his rampage to the next area. With Chopper gone, Kalifa has gone and had enough of Nami's insolent ignoring and resumes her attacks on her. But this time, she was able to get away despite her slippery feet, or so we thought. It's revealed that her leg was returned to normal due to some of the water from the bathtub being splashed on it, and what should have been obvious to all of us is made very apparent now. Water washes away the soap, and therefore gets rid of the golden bubbles. This doesn't really take away the disadvantage Nami finds herself in, though, as Kalifa relentlessly attacks her with the relaxed bubbles and hits her with the Shigan in the shoulder, which I'm amazed Nami actually walks off, because as we know, Shigan is basically like being shot with a gun. And what I love about Nami's fight, though, is every time she sees an attack from Kalifa, she continues to formulate an idea of how her fruit works and how to counter it. Kalifa then brushes it off as Nami trying to bluff her by showing strength. But really, Nami is actually thinking things through. And I love how Nami even references that it's no longer going to be a magic show like the last time against Miss Doublefinger in Arabasta. And now we see that just how great of a matchup Nami is for Kalifa, as Nami is the only one on the crew that could have produced their own water to combat her devil fruit. Although Zoro probably could have overpowered Kalifa, since Sanji was actually pretty close to beating her if it wasn't for the fact that he wouldn't hit a woman. Nami then shows off her new mastery of the Clima-Tact by now implementing 5 mirages at the same time of varying sizes. And here we get our second Chibi straw hat, as one of the mirages is the Chibi Nami, which is really too cute. Nami just continues to outwit her opponents with her insane meteorological knowledge and skills to close the gap of the overwhelming physical strength, which is what's always so amazing about Nami. That's an awesome takeaway too. Too often in life we concentrate on the things we're deficient at when it comes to skills or what we have to offer. Like we aren't strong enough or clever enough, tall enough, pretty enough, or whatever it is. But really, where we may lack in some areas, we may also greatly outpace most people in other areas. and we can use that to elevate ourselves. In other words, don't try to be something you're not and be the best version of you, which is a very cliche saying, but very appropriate. I also love the little wordplay about Kalifa mentioning how cocky Nami's prediction of the next attack defeating Kalifa is, but Nami corrects her and says it's not a prediction, but a forecast, playing on the weather and meteorology theming, which she continues to use to taunt Kalifa, playing up the mind games, which is so awesome. Like, I love Nami like this. Nami then finishes Kalifa off with a new move called Thunderlance Tempo, which Kalifa is unable to react quickly enough to escape and is fried to a crisp, with Nami saying an epic victory one-liner that you should always listen to your navigator's forecast. Like, ooh, so good. I mean, man, that finisher is probably one of Nami's best. And I think even to this day, it is probably one of my more favorite Nami finishers. After a couple more scenes of Luffy and Lucci duking it out, we get back to Nami where Frankie has finally made his way back up for a second time. And I love how he constantly refers to Chopper as Dear Gorilla. And also we see Nami's first fist of love actually work for Frankie when Frankie states that the only way to deal with Monster Chopper is to kill him. And he's definitely part of the crew at this point if you've received a fist of love from Nami. The scene leaves on another funny moment between the two as Nami remembers she's looking for Kalifa's key and just starts ripping her clothes off with Frankie just standing there cheering her on like, ow, nice Harenchi, or nice scandalous woman with a big thumbs up, which is another pretty funny scene. Monster Chopper finally makes his way up to Zoro and Sogeking. Zoro smartly figures out what's really going on with Chopper, but is unable to do anything, but thankfully, Frankie and Nami do show up and save the day. Frankie blasts Chopper out of the tower with Nami's calculations assisting him in order to get Chopper into the water to negate his Devil Fruit power, and it works without a hitch. And first off, I love that Nami and Frankie are already working, as well as they are as a combo, and that she trusts him enough to do somewhat of a risky maneuver, putting Chopper's life in his hands by basically dumping him into the ocean as a Devil Fruit user. And Frankie's the one who blasts him out and then also jumps in after him. Not only that, but the next episode we find out that she even entrusts him to be the one to go to Robin first. And kind of on a side note, but there's a really weird continuity error in this moment. As we see the back of Chopper's head and shoulders as he's sinking into the water, it depicts him in his heavy point with his red jacket still on, but the jacket should be long gone as it was ripped up when he grew in size. But also Chopper's default form is his small hybrid brain point form, so when you see him fall in the water most scenes prior to and subsequently in the series, he comes out in his small form. But here, I think it was just a really weird goof. I don't know what happened here, but yeah, if you're curious, in the manga, this panel is depicted as you don't really see Chopper at all. It's just a panel of basically bubbles just shrouding him completely, so you don't even see Chopper. So I'm not even sure what the decision was when they animated this scene. I mean, it's a really quick scene. You only see it for about 2-3 seconds, so it's not a big deal, but it is kind of interesting how that kind of got through. And with that, episode 296 ends on the much anticipated release of Zoro and Sogeking. And as usual, Zoro has some of the best and most badass lines ever, mentioning that instead of laughing about the fact that they finally got the handcuffs off, they should regret it, as they'll never get a chance like that to get Zoro again. And it's just like pure goosebumps right there. With that, episode 297 begins with Robin attempting to get away from Spandam. But the only reason I bring this scene up is because we actually get to see how Spandam's sword Funkfried is actually used. And it is quite powerful, as it not only extends and has great power, but to Spandam, it doesn't seem to require much skill or strength to wield it. I mean, these objects imbued with devil fruits are really interesting, and I wish it was explored a bit more in the story, because even where I'm at, it's not really explored all that much. But getting back to Frankie saving Chopper, I have to criticize how Frankie administers CPR on Chopper, because he just basically stomps on his chest. I mean, I know it's for comedy's sake, but it's just so mean, I feel like. Just then, conveniently, Chimney, Gombe, and Kokoro show up to let Frankie know of the shortcut to get to the gates of justice and to Robin. We also learn in a brief flashback, now with 2 keys in hand, Nami sends Frankie off to try and get the keys to Robin. This scene is pretty cool when Frankie brings up the fact that even if they free Robin, there's no way back, and Nami brings up an incredibly positive mindset and outlook, not only for their escape, but something we could we could all look to more in life. And this sort of life lesson that she basically talks about is how their 2 options are either to go back towards the option they already know very much about and is basically terrible, or go towards the unknown future where they don't know what's waiting for them, but there is the possibility of something positive awaiting them. So why not venture into that option with possibility? And I think in life we're often presented with crossroads and decisions in our own life where we're in a situation that needs change, but we often are tempted to go back to what we know is safe, but is not necessarily the most positive option for us, and it's not really good for positive growth. And when what we should really do is venture into the unknown realm of possibilities, even though it might be scary because we don't know what's out there. There might be something worse waiting for us or failure. However, if you're in a rut, why not take a chance on yourself and see what's out there and go towards the possibility of a positive future instead of just sitting back in mediocrity or worse, even negativity. Anyways, I really like that sort of outlook, and it's kind of really brushed over, but yeah, that small moment, I think it really hit me reading that, and even now, like I see myself like looking at that lesson and being like, yeah, that is something that I should really take away from this moment. Lastly, I love the bookend to this scene. We get a call back to the leave it to ... And then when Frankie gets a little impressed, he asks, to you? And Nami instead says, to luck, just like Zoro did when they were crashing the Rocket Man to Eniaslavi at the beginning of the arc. So I love that even though Nami was pissed off at Zoro for using that earlier, she now uses it on Frankie, which is, I don't know if it's like character growth, but that's pretty funny to me. But back in the present again, we finally get to the Kaku versus Zoro fight. Kaku is definitely a force to be reckoned with his natural abilities combined with his new Devil Fruit powers, but we immediately see Jabra sitting next to Sogeking and Nami, watching as he makes up some BS story about how he doesn't want to kill people and that he wants them to save Robin, then drops the key for them, playing up his wolf nature with the parallels of being a perpetual liar, like in the Little Red Riding Hood story, as well as the whole Boy Who Cried Wolf story as well, but instead turning it on its head by being the wolf that constantly lies himself. Although for a man like Usopp to fall for such an obvious lie is just sad. Like, he of all people should be able to recognize a bad lie. As soon as he goes for the key, Jabra hits him with a Ju Shigan, or the 10-fingered Shigan. And despite his best efforts, Usopp is no match for Jabra. Not even close, and Nami can't even get close enough to help. Usopp's in some serious trouble as Jabra is ready to finish him off, with Nami pleading to spare his life, and Zoro is unable to get away to save him either, with Kaku beating up on him to lend any sort of help. It's really a desperate situation, and I love how this moment is built up, even though most of us in our heart of hearts all know who's still available and will be here to save the day again. And I remember when I first read this chapter, I was just saying to myself over and over, he's going to show up, over and over in my head. And right on cue, with a huge blow to Jabra's face, Sanji is back, and so fucking cool. If Zoro is the embodiment of badassery of the Straw Hats, Sanji is the embodiment of unadulterated coolness. Just like in Arabasta, Sanji makes himself known via a code name, this time responding to Jabra's inquiry about who the hell he is by uttering a hunter, or Kariudo. And Sanji always has the coolest entries, and usually they come when we're at the most direst of dire situations, and he shows up just in the nick of time to a massive release of tension, and it's always so amazing. And just as we all predicted, the bathtub that fell from Kalifa's room via Monster Chopper splashed water on Sanji, which had freed him from the golden hour effects, or golden bubble effects. This next moment, I think, often gets lost in the treasure trove of amazing moments in NES Lobby, but this is personally one of my favorite moments in the arc. The scene, of course, I'm referring to is the moment where Sanji gives Usopp the pep talk here. Usopp, feeling useless and weak again, starts to feel sorry for himself, but Sanji points out to both Usopp and Nami that the gates of justice are slowly beginning to open, meaning that Robin is in some serious danger, becoming unreachable, indicating to them that Luffy didn't make it in time and is being held back by Lucci, as well as Frankie, with the massive distance to make up, might not even be able to catch up to Robin as well. However, Sanji's main goal here is to remind Nami and mainly Usopp of the bigger picture, that Robin is their main goal and that winning the fight against Jabra is not the focus, and that they all have their strengths and parts to play. He goes on to remind Usopp that there is something only he and he alone is probably capable of doing to save Robin. Not only that, but for the first time since putting on the Sogeking mask, Sanji actually refers to Usopp as Usopp. As long as Usopp is here, Robin can still be saved regardless of whether Luffy and Frankie can catch up to her. Now, I will be fully transparent. I had no idea what Sanji was talking about at this point, but trust me when I tell you, the payoff to this is so damn amazing and satisfying. And even in the next episode, we see that Usopp doesn't actually know what he's talking about quite yet either. And I'm actually pretty happy that I hadn't guessed it, as it preserved the wonder and surprise for me when I read it for the first time. This also highlights how Sanji is basically their strategist. He is always thinking ahead and able to discern the bigger picture, which is one of my favorite traits about Sanji. I think it's also very fitting that this speech is coming from Sanji, as he is the one crew member that probably cares about the well being of everyone the most. As the cook, he's tasked with caring for them through their nutrition, but also he's the most well aware and uses his kindness and empathy towards everyone else, which is why back when Luffy and Usopp were fighting, he was the first to intervene when Luffy almost threatened to kick him out, as well as when he stopped Chopper from showing pity and mercy after Usopp had lost the duel, thinking of Usopp's pride in that moment. Not only that, but it just reinforces what Sanji literally just went through with Kalifa. He was ill-equipped to handle fighting her, but had Nami stepped in for him. Now it's his turn to do what he does best and take on Jabra where Usopp can't, therefore freeing up Usopp to do what he can do. I know this is just reiterating the obvious, but I just love this dynamic of the crew and can't get enough of the crew working together and covering for each other. One Piece is one of the few series where literally no one is interchangeable. They are all integral to the crew's success. And I just think how Oda writes his story and the characters in this way is incredible and really highlights that in real life we ourselves can't do everything, and we should really rely on one another, not being afraid to admit that and ask for help when we need it. It's a very important lesson and aspect to life. And I love that how Oda somehow managed to keep that intact in One Piece, not just at this point in the story, but even all the way up to like chapter 1000 plus. It's still a very important thing where you see in other, shonen series, a lot of characters just kind of fall by the wayside because they're not important. But Oda somehow manages to keep the entire crew relevant, and not only just relevant, but important, like just incredibly vital to the success of their, crew. And I also want to talk a little bit more about Sanji and Usopp in the spoiler section, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. But yeah, with that, things are starting to heat up and get a little bit dire as the monster trio get ready to duke it out with their respective opponents, and it's up to the remaining members to rescue Robin before she gets to the gates of justice. But we'll have to wait till the next podcast to talk about Zoro and Sanji's fight. But yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates of when I post new episodes or see some pictures of my manga. As always, I want to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Like I mentioned, there will be a brief spoiler section afterwards. And so yeah, stay tuned for that if you're interested. But if not, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, so spoiler section. The reason why I kind of waited until now to talk about this is because I wanted to basically talk about all of this at once. Because I could have talked about a lot of this in the episodes where we talked about Usopp almost getting kicked out and Luffy and Usopp's duel. But I waited because I wanted to get this moment wrapped in as well in the spoiler section. So I think it's interesting that Sanji's reason for understanding Usopp and his sort of inferiority complex so well was, due to him being seen as useless and weak to the crew, and this mirrors what we find out what Sanji went through with his family, with the Germa and Judge and all of his brothers and sisters. And he didn't want to see Usopp face basically the same fate. And there's a lot to unpack with that when we see his flashback in Whole Cake Island. And it's really sad, but it's also really interesting to see these scenes in retrospect after having seen that flashback in Whole Cake Island, because it puts all of this into perspective and it really makes you see why Sanji was so angry at Luffy when he almost kicked him out. And because you saw what Sanji had went through with his family when he was viewed as being a failure or a failed experiment, and weak when he didn't get the Germa upgrades and enhancements like his brothers and sisters did, and he was always ostracized for that and cast out to the point where he was basically imprisoned in that jail cell with the iron mask. And I mean, that scene alone is just heartbreaking. And I know Sanji realizes that that's not what's going to happen to Usopp, but the fact that, yeah, Luffy almost basically confirmed what Usopp had been feeling, that he had also been feeling weak and useless and was almost cast out of the Straw Hats. I think which is really shows why Sanji got so pissed and just immediately kicked Luffy as hard as he could to prevent him from saying those words, because he knew Luffy didn't mean those words and that he was basically just getting super angry. But it's just, yeah, he knows what it's like firsthand to be viewed as weak among, his family, essentially, and then being cast out and being judged by that. And what kind of emotional damage that does to a person, because clearly, as we see throughout the series, Sanji is affected by that and really doesn't get any closure until the end of Whole Cake Island, when he finally stands up to Judge. And when he saves his brothers and his father, and even though he hates them. And so I think it really does show that Sanji has a lot of depth here. And I don't know, it's interesting because it took so long for the whole Cake Island stuff to happen. It's interesting to see if Oda actually had this sort of backstory for Sanji in mind, because it is interesting that Oda withheld Sanji's time before Baratie and Zeph, and see what really happened before that. Why was he on his own on this sort of like cruise ship as just this little chef before he gets basically kidnapped by Zeph almost. But yeah, it is really interesting to see Sanji's sort of evolution and why he's so kind, why he's so compassionate about people, because he was treated like crap as a kid. And it is a big sticking point for Sanji to maintain that sort of compassion and kindness. And it is really weird to see that, I think, come up so early, I guess, cuz this is a thing that doesn't even really get resolved until Wano and his fight against Queen. And so you really do see, this is a really like long character development arc for Sanji. And I think we finally see sort of the climax of that in Wano. I mean, I'm sure there's a little bit more, but yeah, it's really cool to see, I think, right now, sort of the beginnings of that, and we don't really understand where Sanji's motivation is up until we see that flashback and we see how he deals with the aftermath of having to deal with the Germa and his father and family. But I thought that was really cool, and I think it really Again, I don't know if it was intentional, but when you go back and read this or watch this section of the story, it really all starts to come together and make sense in terms of Sanji's character and the way he behaves. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode. See ya.